Hey ICM course, welcome to the first of several videos walking you through the content that we did not cover in our last PD that was canceled. I want to make sure that you guys understand that it's awesome if you go through this. I think objects are super useful and you should absolutely avail yourself to them. It'll really change your programming and it's a great thing to introduce to students, but I'm sure that probably few to none of you have gotten to this point in the year so far due to remote learning. And even during a normal school year, all of this is like a bonus stretch for kids to learn. So keep that in mind as you go through. If any of this feels like stressful or overwhelming or you have questions, that is okay. We are here to support you. But also you are not going to be lost at sea if this is something you don't understand. So this first video is going to run you through slides 1 to 31. The next slides, or the next videos will run you through subsequent slides, including some code-alongs and some wrap-up closure. If there's anything you have questions on or you need more support on, please don't hesitate to come by the ICM Slack. We are happy to help you out. It is linked in these slides if you guys need that to access. Reminder that Jose and I are always there. We can help you out with whatever you need. You can also shoot us an email. We have office hours running that will probably continue by appointment if you do need support in whatever you are doing. So the PD that we would have done covers classes and objects, which are one of my favorite things. I think they're incredibly useful, and they really change how you think about programming. So we're going to go over that today, and you guys can do a quick feeling check-in if you want. We made this way back before we were gripped by a global pandemic, but I think it still is probably true, although maybe number 3 is like you running out of your apartment due to cabin fever. I don't know. So, it's just me presenting today, but we are all still here for you. Again, we exist on Slack, email, office hours. Let us know what we can do to support you. We are happy to help. And today's big objectives throughout these videos and these slides is just to get you guys really comfortable with object-oriented programming in classes. These are words you may or may not have heard tossed around before. They're super useful, super common in the modern programming world. They help to abstract things further in your code, which, as we've talked about, is that idea of detail removal to help with ease of reading and repetition and repeating things. We'll do a little bit of work with arrays and with for loops, and we'll talk about how you can use this in projects from the P5 curriculum and things that you just might want to make. Okay, so we will talk about organization, encapsulation, modularity, abstraction, classes, objects, arrays, and for loops, which you've already talked about before, but this is a new, interesting application that I think you guys will enjoy. Norms, I'm going to breeze through because you guys are not here in person. Our agenda is not filled out because you guys are running through this on your own. And just as a reminder, you guys should have learned everything from units 1 through 5. Again, if any of that is something that's new, confusing, you realize you went over it, but you haven't taught it yet, and you just need a refresher, please come to Slack or email us or get in touch because we are really happy to help and support. Okay, so by the end of today, you will be able to make a project kind of like the one that's being displayed now. This is just a GIF of the project running, and I know that some of you might be thinking, didn't we do this back in animation? And we are going to apply some concepts. We are now at the point in the year where we're learning kind of these slivers of new things, and on top of those slivers, we're applying all these things that you guys have learned before. So you can apply this to text, images, the robot that you guys did way back on day 1. All of that is yours to play with. We're just going to make it more interesting and more useful. You guys are not here as a check-in, but again, we want to hear from you. Tell us how you're doing. Big topics we're going over today from the blueprint: abstraction, programming, algorithms, data, and our CS practices of analyzing, prototyping, and communicating. So for classes and objects, the way that we would have launched this if you guys were in person, and you're welcome to pause this video and play along right now, is to have you guys open a new sketch and try and make as many ellipses as possible that are all individually animated. So they all need to move separately from each other. If I was running this in a class, I'd make it like a contest. This is also the way I introduce things to students, and they have a lot of fun with it. So once you guys are done with that, pause. Normally there's a timer on the board. We run it for 5 minutes, we pause, we take a shout out of how people made different amounts of animated bubbles. And then we ask why we would do this. And more importantly, how would people feel if I asked you to make a dozen animated ellipses, or 50, or 100, or thousands of animated ellipses on a screen? And most people are like, oh, I could do it, but like that would be so much work. Like, why would I spend all my time doing that? If you wanted them to look different than each other, if you wanted them to be different colors, different sizes, if you wanted them to have that different individualized motion, you would have to put a lot of work into this. It would involve a lot of creation of ellipses, of sets of variables for every ellipse. You might need to make variables for every ellipse's x position, y position, the speed it's moving. You might need to write conditionals for all of those things if you don't want them running off the page. And that can be really difficult to do. And that's kind of where this idea of classes and objects come in. JavaScript has a template format, and it's not just JavaScript because object-oriented programming exists in a lot of languages. Some languages are more object-focused than others, and JavaScript is mostly objects, which is what you guys are going to find out shortly. So this template that we're using is this idea of a class. And classes are like a way to organize our code and simplify our code, but they're also kind of like a super variable mixed with a function, and that's what we're going to start getting into as we go through our code alongs. Classes are a special kind of function that create an object. It's like that cookie cutter or template. When I teach this to my students, we talk about waffle irons because there's just some really good gifs of waffle irons. I can pour lots of different things in that waffle iron, some that are edible, some that are not. But whatever happens, I'm going to end up with a waffle. It's going to look the same. It's going to behave the same. It's just going to change based on what I'm putting into it. So that template and those properties, that's what's called encapsulation, where you're kind of taking these ideas, you're shoving them into a mold, you're containing them in that mold, and then you're using that mold to create multiples in your program. And if this seems overwhelming now, we're going to give you like 1,000 real-world examples before we start coding. So just hang in there. Classes are the backbone of this idea of object-oriented programming. Classes are the thing that creates the object. So again, back to like the waffle maker is the class. The things coming out of the waffle maker are the objects. Objects are another way to decompose problems, to break these big things down into small building blocks, and also to abstract out those problems. You figure out how things work, you get it working once, you know all the details are there, then you only have to rely on the class and the objects. You don't have to keep recoding those things over and over and over. You guys are going to find out that it's a way easier way to maintain code that involves lots of variables and lots of changing pieces because it all kind of gets hidden in that object from the class. One really basic way to think about objects is to think about minions from the thousands of movies that have been made about minions. These could all be made from one class template, one minion template living in like the basement of the secret lab. But every minion's a little different. They have different amounts of eyes, of hair, height, width. They're all yellow. That's a trait that stays consistent. They're all wearing overalls. That's something that stays the same, but maybe they have different hobbies or different preferences. And this is like a great mini project to try and code out a minion with your class. An object is just a collection of related data and functionality. They contain variables and functions, and when we write functions inside of a class, it's called a method. When we give variables to a class, it's called a property. And we're going to talk more about this as we start coding. But we have some examples here that like a class contained inside an apple might be a worm or the different worms inside of it. A property of a table might be the number of legs or the color. Properties of a newborn baby are generally like the name, the weight, the length, all those things that get reported happily by the parents. We talked about minions a little bit. So normally we would have you guys break down an object, any object in your life, and try and break it down into generic properties and things that it can do. While we're not doing this live, if this is something you're working through, I would encourage you to share it on Slack anyway, because we would love to see it. But I'm just going to go through some examples that I have had my students generate and that I've gone over with my students before. So I like to give examples that exist in the real world and also online. So in the real world, a great example is sneakers. Sneakers would be a class of things that make specific shoes. So you have like Nikes, Adidas. I'm not a sneakerhead, so I know that like those are very broad characterizations and categorizations, but y'all can break it down further. The class of sneaker would make each specific type, brand, or whatever of shoe. but every type, brand, whatever of shoe might vary in color, size, design, branding, price. All of those would be individual properties. The function of the sneaker, generally the same. You can put it on your foot, most of the time you can lace it or somehow like tighten it. All of that functionality remains. Another example would be cars. Specific cars would be objects made from the general car mold. It might change a little bit. The color, the number of doors, the name, like exact measurements might change, but it's still built from that same model. Online examples of classes might be Instagram posts. Specific posts would be considered objects. They vary based on like the image you plug in, the filter, the caption, the number of likes, comments, whatever. And also like Twitter accounts. Specific accounts would be objects. Things like the username, the associated email, the age, all of that would vary based on the individual object. Some other good examples to show to students are things that are like visual, they can see. So one example is the candies in Candy Crush. Every single candy would be an object. This is almost definitely how it's programmed as well. And we need to know things about it in order to make it work correctly. If you play Pokemon or other games with characters, every Pokemon might be an object where it has kind of the same basic structure of having like a name, experience, level, move set, but that changes Pokemon to Pokemon. Classes themselves are this very special kind of function that constructs an object. We see my waffle maker here. Inside of this class, you can define all the things that make an object what it is, so just like a template. What we're going to start figuring out together is how you build this class into something in P5 that will hold what you want and do what you want to do. So in our next video, we're going to start by building our first class. The first class is going to be a little boring because it's not going to be visual, but I hope that we see how useful it is and how much time it can save us. Then we'll start moving on to things on the canvas. Hopefully you'll be back for that next video, and again, reach out if you are confused after running through some of this code.